separate group found themselves gradually coming closer and closer. At one point, you couldn't speak the word rock and roll.
Billy Gibbons spent 50 years being the coolest man in every room he walked into, and nobody ever saw him try. He built a guitar tone so thick and so dangerous that other players spent entire careers chasing it and never arrived. But behind those sunglasses and that legendary beard, Gibbons was keeping a list of names he hated the most. At 75, some of it finally came out. 5 names, 5 stories. Not one of them is what you expect. Eric Clapton. We are starting here because this is the one that tells you everything about who Billy Gibbons actually is. This is not a story about an artist he dismissed. This is a story about an artist he deeply respected, publicly credited, and still could not make peace with, because the thing they disagreed about was too fundamental to argue around. In a 2012 Guitar World interview, Gibbons said that Eric Clapton and the British blues revival saved American music. He called it the Great Salvation. He said that Clapton, the Rolling Stones, and Jeff Beck picked up the American blues tradition at the exact moment American radio had abandoned it and carried it back across the Atlantic with enough electricity to make a new generation care again. Without them, he acknowledged, ZZ Top might never have existed. So the admiration was real and documented, and the tension was just as real, just as documented, and considerably more interesting. The disagreement came down to a single question both men had organized their entire careers around answering. What is the blues actually supposed to do to the person listening to it? Clapton's answer, built over 50 years, was that the blues was a tradition to be honored. You studied the masters, you learned the structures, and the emotional vocabulary built by Robert Johnson and Freddie King and Muddy Waters. You reproduced that vocabulary with precision and fidelity, and in doing so, you kept the flame alive. His work with John Mayall's Blues Breakers was scholarship at the highest level. His Royal Albert Hall Blues Night concerts in the early 1990s were, by any measure, extraordinary events. The man treated every performance like a ceremony, and the audience left feeling like they had witnessed something important and well-preserved. There was nothing accidental about any of it, and that, to Gibbons, was precisely where Clapton lost the thread. Gibbons's answer came from a completely different place. He did not find the blues through records. He found it through rooms. At 7 years old, his parents brought him to a Houston studio where B.B. King was recording. He sat in the corner and watched the whole thing in silence. As a teenager, Lightnin' Hopkins played live at coffee houses on the Houston circuit, and Gibbons attended them, sitting close enough to feel the music in his chest rather than just hear it through a speaker. By the time ZZ Top formed in 1969, Gibbons had spent 15 years absorbing the blues from its original sources in rooms where it was actually alive. He described ZZ Top's philosophy to Rolling Stone as being like Salvador Dali interpreting the Delta, a surrealist take, the tradition being pushed until it was almost unrecognizable, and then pushed further still. In 1979, Clapton invited Gibbons to an informal jam session at Olympic Studios in London, a gathering that also included Albert Lee and Gary Brooker. The invitation was genuine. Clapton wanted to play with Gibbons, admired what he did, and had no reason to expect anything other than a warm evening of music. What he did not fully anticipate was what happened the moment Gibbons plugged in his 1959 Les Paul, the guitar he calls Pearly Gates, and has described as having a powerful inner soul. Gibbons played loud, loose, and completely uninhibited, the way the blues sounds when someone is inside it, rather than presenting it from a safe distance. Multiple people present described the same sequence of events afterward. Clapton went quiet. He stepped back from the center of the room. Before the session properly concluded, he left, reportedly muttering something about too much fuzz and not enough feeling. It was the most revealing sentence he could have chosen, because to Gibbons, the fuzz was not obscuring the feeling. The fuzz was the feeling. That was the entire argument, compressed into one exit line. That remark reached Gibbons, as remarks always do. In a 1985 Rolling Stone interview, asked directly to compare himself to Clapton, Gibbons delivered the line that reportedly stung Clapton far more than he ever showed publicly. If the blues is a fire, he has got the place next to the fireplace. I am still in the flames. What makes this the most important rivalry in this entire story is that Gibbons was not dismissing Clapton's talent. He was taking it completely seriously. The frustration was precisely that Clapton was genuinely brilliant, and still, in Gibbons's view, missing the essential point. The blues was not supposed to be performed carefully. It was supposed to escape from you. It was supposed to arrive at the listener like something unplanned, like a confession rather than a recital. The moment it was polished enough to sit at the Royal Albert Hall without leaving any dirt on the seats, something irreplaceable had been traded away for something that merely looked like the real thing from the outside. That was the most civilized war Billy Gibbons ever fought, conducted in studios and interviews and very careful public statements. The next one had amplifiers turned up to drown out the other man, insults delivered through microphones to 10,000 people, and a final night where Gibbons unplugged his guitar mid-show, said absolutely nothing, and disappeared into the dark. Ronnie Van Zant. In 1974, two of the most thoroughly alpha human beings in rock and roll were put on the same tour. ZZ Top had just released Tres Hombres,
the third album by well-known American blues rock combo ZZ Top, or as they call them in the United States, ZZ Top, and this is late 70s.
The album with La Grange on it, the one that sounded like it had been recorded somewhere outside Houston, by men who had never heard the word studio. Lynyrd Skynyrd had released their debut the year before, a record so fully formed and so devastatingly confident that it still sounds, 50 years later, like a band that had been practicing in secret for a decade. Freebird, Simple Man, Gimme 3 Steps, Tuesday's Gone. 4 songs that could have been a complete artistic statement on their own. A tour manager who worked for both bands described the fundamental problem with the clarity the promoters apparently lacked. Billy wanted control, precision, and groove. Ronnie wanted fire, sweat, and whiskey on stage. They were both completely right, and both entirely unwilling to accommodate the other. What gets lost in the standard version of this story is that these two bands were not the same kind of thing, and both men knew it and cared deeply about the difference. ZZ Top were blues interpreters, their foundation built on the Black Texas and Delta blues tradition, amplified and pushed until it had an almost industrial weight. Lynyrd Skynyrd were something different. Country, gospel, hard rock, and the complicated mythology of the white American South fused into a music that smelled like pine trees and red clay roads. The argument between Gibbons and Van Zant was, underneath all the stage-time disputes and amplifier wars, an argument about which of these traditions sat closer to the original source of everything. That was an argument neither man was built to lose willingly. The first real confrontation happened at a rehearsal in Birmingham, Alabama. ZZ Top's crew had prepared the stage carefully for a sound check. When Gibbons arrived, Skynyrd's equipment already occupied the entire stage with no space left for anyone else. When he raised it with the road manager, Van Zant stepped in personally. "You guys from Texas think you have the blues," he said. "We're just playing it down here." Gibbons kept his composure completely, smiled slowly, and replied, "Then try playing it in tune." It was a quiet comment about tuning that was not about tuning at all. It found the specific vulnerability in Van Zant's position and pressed it with total precision. After that exchange, whatever surface civility had existed between them was finished. The performances that followed became something audiences in those cities still talk about. Both bands extended their sets, turned their amplifiers past what the rooms required, competed for the crowd's attention in ways that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with territory. In Atlanta one night, Van Zant addressed the audience directly through his microphone. "We are the real sound of the South," he told 10,000 people. Not some Hollywood cowboys with cheap sunglasses. Backstage, Gibbons said nothing to anyone. Those who knew him recognized this as considerably more dangerous than shouting. The tour ended in Jacksonville, Skynyrd's home city, on a night Skynyrd had been given the closing slot. When Skynyrd ran long and ate into ZZ Top's time, Gibbons unplugged his guitar without a word, walked off stage, got on the bus, and instructed the crew to pack everything. ZZ Top were gone before the night was over and did not return to the tour. Nobody made an announcement. Nobody sent a message. The bus simply left, and the silence it left behind said more than any argument could have. In 1976, not long before the plane crash that would kill Van Zant at 29,
40 years ago, October 20th at 6:30 is about the time that we went down. Then we ran out of fuel over Mississippi and spiraled in. Ronnie was killed, Steve Gaines was killed, Cassie Gaines.
he was asked in an interview whether he respected ZZ Top. He smiled. "They are good guys," he said. "Pretty much clean. Maybe even too clean." It was a concession dressed as a slight, which was exactly the kind of answer Van Zant always gave when he had decided the conversation was over. The remarkable coda to this story came in 2023, when ZZ Top and Lynyrd Skynyrd co-headlined the Sharp-Dressed Simple Man tour across America. Gibbons spoke about Skynyrd with genuine warmth during the promotional run and said he could hear "Gimme 3 Steps" over and over and never tire of it. The argument about who owned the South had been settled, quietly and finally, by the simple shared fact that both of them had lasted long enough to stop needing to win. With Van Zant, the friction was at least honest. Two men who knew exactly where they stood and fought for territory without disguising it as anything else. The next person on this list got under Gibbons' skin not by challenging him face to face, but by admiring him loudly from a position that Gibbons believed with absolute conviction had never been earned. Kid Rock. Here is the thing about Kid Rock that made Billy Gibbons' jaw tighten every time the subject came up. While Gibbons was 17 years old, sitting in a Houston coffee house watching Lightnin' Hopkins play the blues 3 feet away from him, absorbing it through the walls and the air and the specific weight of those rooms, the man who would eventually call himself Kid Rock had not yet drawn his first breath. While ZZ Top spent 7 consecutive years driving across the South without stopping, playing every kind of room that existed, and building their sound the only way it can actually be built, which is slowly, performance by performance, failure by failure. Robert Ritchie was somewhere in suburban Michigan, growing up with no particular connection to any of it. None of that would matter if Kid Rock had simply made his own music and left it at that. What made Gibbons' patience run out was the part where Ritchie decided that the tradition those years had produced was something he was entitled to claim as the foundation of his own identity, without having spent a single night earning it. In interview after interview through the late 1990s and into the 2000s, Kid Rock publicly cited ZZ Top as the music that shaped him. He named LaGrange and Sharp-Dressed Man specifically, describing those records as the thing that taught him what earned swagger actually looked like. He spoke about Gibbons with the devotion of a serious student paying tribute to his most important teacher, which would have been touching if Gibbons had believed for a single second that the lesson had actually been understood, rather than simply borrowed for the occasion. Gibbons received all of this approximately the way a master carpenter receives a compliment from someone who has assembled a flat-pack bookcase and decided that qualifies as furniture. One longtime crew member put it plainly: Billy felt like Kid Rock was not inspired by him. He was imitating him, and poorly at that. The clearest window into the dynamic opened backstage at the 1999 MTV Europe Music Awards. Kid Rock, riding the enormous wave of Devil Without a Cause, approached Gibbons with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed everywhere and said, "Man, we should do something together, the old dog and the new school." Gibbons replied without hesitation and without warmth, "Dogs do not bark with echoes." Kid Rock had nothing ready to say in return. 4 years later, at the 2003 CMT Awards, Kid Rock used his acceptance speech to take a swing at the old guard. "Some of these old guys in cowboy hats think rock and country belong in separate bars," he said. "I say buy the bar and play both." The cameras found Gibbons in the audience, completely still behind his dark glasses. Reporters nearby swore they heard him afterward. That boy confuses volume with value. When Kid Rock's management reached out repeatedly with collaborative offers, including a guest appearance, a remix credit, and a joint heritage tour, Gibbons declined every single one with the same kind of compressed, final language that left no room for a follow-up conversation. The blues do not need Wi-Fi. Some songs are not meant for filters. I do not do digital. Each refusal was technically a reason and actually something closer to a verdict. The last chapter between them was written at a charity concert in Nashville in 2013 during a group jam that closed the evening. When Kid Rock entered the song midway at full volume, Gibbons put his guitar down, stood still until the song finished, bowed his head, and walked off without a word. A camera caught him telling the drummer quietly on the way out, "That is not music. That is karaoke with an accent." Kid Rock, to his credit, never retaliated. "Billy is a legend," he said afterward. "He is allowed to dislike whatever he wants." Shortly after that night, ZZ Top released La Futura with Rick Rubin, a record stripped of every modern convenience and built entirely around tone, grit, and the refusal to explain itself. Anyone who had been paying attention already knew exactly what it was saying and exactly who it was being said to. Kid Rock wore the costume without the calluses, and Gibbons never forgave it. But the next name is a wound of a completely different kind. This one was from Texas. This one had stood at the back of Gibbons's shows as a teenager and absorbed every note, every move, every secret of the sound. And then he went out and did it so well that the world forgot who taught him. Stevie Ray Vaughan. There is a guitar in existence that Billy Gibbons commissioned as a gift for Stevie Ray Vaughan. He hired a luthier named James Hamilton of Hamilton Guitars in Buffalo, New York, to build it from scratch. He had Vaughan's name inlaid in mother of pearl on the fretboard. When Vaughan changed his stage name during the build, Gibbons had the inlay redone without complaint and without making anything of it. The guitar was presented to Vaughan on April 29, 1984. Stevie was so immediately in love with it that he played it that same evening at a show at the University of Buffalo, and he used it for the rest of his life, one of his most frequently played instruments on stage and in the studio, from that first night until the night he died. That guitar is the most important detail in this entire story, not because it changes what came after, but because it tells you the truth about the foundation of what came after. A man who secretly resented Stevie Ray Vaughan does not spend his own money commissioning a custom instrument with the other man's name inlaid in mother of pearl. This was never a simple rivalry. This was two men with a profound and genuinely complicated connection to each other and to the same music, who could never fully resolve what that connection meant because the professional stakes kept rising faster than the friendship could absorb. Their history went back to the early 1970s when Vaughan was a teenager in Austin, treating ZZ Top's live shows like seminars. A musician named Scott Ferris, who played with Vaughan in a high school band, recalled a specific night that captured the whole dynamic. ZZ Top walked into Arthur's bar one evening and told the manager they wanted to take 2 sets. Billy Gibbons said simply, "We will play, and if you do not like us, we will leave." They played, and Stevie, Ferris remembered, could barely contain himself. He could not wait to play some blues with Billy. By the early 1980s, the situation had become something Gibbons found genuinely difficult to process. Vaughan had absorbed everything available from Gibbons's playing and the wider Texas blues tradition and taken it somewhere extraordinary. The tone he produced, the combination of heavy string gauges on a Stratocaster running through a tube screamer and into Dumble amplifiers, the Texas shuffle rhythm that formed the backbone of his improvisations, all of it bore an unmistakable sonic kinship to the sound Gibbons had been making with his Les Paul for over a decade. Adding real tension to the situation, Vaughan's management reportedly reached out to Bill Ham, ZZ Top's longtime manager, seeking guidance in navigating the major label world. ZZ Top's engineer Joe Hardy described Gibbons's reaction without softening it. Billy felt like he had been doing that since before Stevie even had a guitar. When Texas Flood arrived in 1983 and critics immediately called Vaughan the new king of Texas blues, the man who had revived the genre and brought it to a mass audience, Gibbons found himself in a position that was both uncomfortable and genuinely absurd. He had been playing Texas blues on a national stage since 1971, keeping the tradition alive through disco and punk, and the synthesizer years, doing the unglamorous work of holding the door open while the rest of the industry looked the other way. The world was now being told the story had a new beginning, and that beginning did not include him. At the 1985 Montreux Jazz Festival, both men were present. Vaughan had been famously booed off that same stage in 1982 when a European jazz audience had no frame of reference for what he was doing. By 1985, he had "Couldn't Stand the Weather" behind him and a Carnegie Hall headline to his name, and the kind of momentum that was no longer possible to argue with. Backstage, Vaughan approached Gibbons and told him he was the inspiration for everything. Gibbons gave a measured smile and said, "You learned fast." Then he walked away. 4 words that sounded like a compliment and functioned like a door being closed with considerable precision. The recording that never happened sits like a ghost at the center of their story. Vaughan wanted to lay down a dual guitar track with Gibbons, a gesture that anyone who knew both men would have understood as a formal acknowledgement of the line that ran between them. The project reached scheduling discussions and fell apart. Gibbons's reported reasoning, shared only with people he trusted at the time, was simple and devastating. He said he did not pass the torch to someone who already had his flame. In August of 1990, Stevie Ray Vaughan died in a helicopter crash after performing at Alpine Valley in Wisconsin. He was 35 years old.
So Stevie Ray Vaughan, the night he died on a helicopter, he was with his agent and my agent were the same, and they both died. I remember that night.
Gibbons released a public statement that read, "He was a brother in tone, and Texas lost its best." Those who knew Gibbons said the grief was real, and also tangled up in something that had no clean resolution. Joe Hardy described it plainly. He never got closure. He wanted to show Stevie how much he esteemed him, and he also wanted to tell him to back off, and he never got to do either one. In the years afterward, at ZZ Top concerts through the 1990s, Gibbons would occasionally work fragments of Pride and Joy or Texas Flood into his solos without announcement, brief and unmistakable, not as formal tributes, but as something far more private. Acknowledgements of a connection that had been too complicated to speak out loud while Stevie was alive, expressed in the only language both men had ever fully trusted. With Stevie, the pain was watching someone you helped build surpass you in the public eye, and running out of time to say anything honest about it. The last name on this list is different from all the others. This one was never about a peer or a student or a rival from down the road. This one was about a machine, and one man's absolute refusal to pretend the machine was music. Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks grew up in Yukon, Oklahoma, studied marketing at Oklahoma State University, moved to Nashville in 1987, and in the space of 2 years became the most commercially successful country music artist in American history. By the early 1990s, he was selling albums at a rate that had not been seen since the peak of Elvis Presley. His concerts featured flying harness rigs, pyrotechnics, headset microphones, and the kind of production scale that required more logistical planning than a medium-sized military operation. He had studied the staging of arena rock bands, Kiss and Queen among them, and applied those lessons to country music with a precision and effectiveness the industry had never encountered before. His music carried, as critics frequently noted, blues inflections, the emotional vocabulary of heartbreak and loss that the blues had always traded in. He wore big cowboy hats, sang about honky-tonks and whiskey, and the working-class American life that Southern music had claimed as its native subject. Friends in Low Places was the kind of anthem that made 10,000 people in an arena feel like they were all in the same small bar at the same time. The production was immaculate. The emotion was calibrated. Every note landed exactly where it was supposed to land. It was an extraordinary piece of mass communication. And to Billy Gibbons, it was precisely and specifically the problem. A Texas radio host who interviewed Gibbons in 1993 later recalled Billy dismissing the entire Nashville commercial machine with a single image, the kind of blues you can spill on your boots without staining them. The image was perfect because it captured the whole objection. Real blues left marks. Real blues was the kind of thing that got into your clothes and your sleep and stayed there. The version coming out of Nashville was designed, produced, and distributed to move units. It looked like the blues from a distance. Up close, it had no stain at all. What made the specific case of Garth Brooks particularly grating was the admiration he openly expressed. Brooks had cited ZZ Top as an influence throughout his career. He admired their swagger, their ability to blur genre lines, their blues rock authority. He had said so publicly and repeatedly. And when Brooks translated those influences into something radio-ready and stadium-sized, Gibbons felt the admiration arrive as an insult rather than a compliment. It was all the surface with none of the earth it was supposed to have grown from. In a Guitar World interview in 1994, Gibbons made his position as direct as he ever allowed himself to be in print. "The blues are not supposed to sparkle," he said. "If they do, someone is selling it, not playing it." The clearest moment between them came at the 1991 American Music Awards, when both men found themselves in the same backstage green room. Brooks was riding one of the most spectacular commercial ascents in the history of popular music and carried himself with the easy warmth of a man accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. He approached Gibbons, extended his hand, and said, "Man, I love your stuff." Gibbons looked at him, nodded once, and replied, "Glad to hear it. Do not wear it out." 4 words, no anger in them, no heat at all. Just a closed door delivered with perfect composure, which is always the most effective kind. In 2001, Brooks invited Gibbons to participate in a live blues tribute television special. The response became the line that blues fans printed on T-shirts and posted on walls for years afterward. "The blues do not wear rhinestones." It contained an entire argument that neither man ever needed to have directly, because that one sentence had already said everything. Brooks never responded publicly. People close to him said the repeated dismissals landed harder than his manner ever suggested. In later years, he continued to speak about ZZ Top with generosity and without visible bitterness. He understood at some level that Gibbons was not attacking him personally. He was protecting something. And the way Gibbons put it once, in a radio interview that people who heard it still remember, explained the whole thing. It ain't that the man cannot sing. It is that he is singing about heartbreak with a $1 million grin. That single sentence was the entire case. Garth Brooks was brilliant at performing the idea of suffering. Billy Gibbons had spent 50 years trying to transmit the actual thing. In his view, that distinction was not a matter of taste or opinion or generation. It was a matter of truth. And Billy Gibbons, across 7 decades of music, never once pretended the difference did not exist. Billy Gibbons never hated a single person on this list. He just refused to stay quiet while the thing he had spent 50 years earning from the inside out was being dressed up, polished off, and sold to the highest bidder. Which of these 5 surprised you the most? And do you think he was right? Share us in the comments.